Brad,
Yes.
I fulfilled a lifelong dream this weekend.
What's that?
Well, when I was a little boy, I saw a movie. You may have heard of it. It's an indie. It was a small production by 20th Century Fox called Star Wars. And it was about a young farm boy who grew up to save the rebellion and defeat a fascist empire.
He fought a war in the stars?
He flew an X-Wing starfighter and he used it to blow up the bad men.
Oh, wow.
And I have done that now. And a lifelong dream has been fulfilled. I put on a virtual reality headset. It's a new bleeding edge technology. And I got in the cockpit of a starfighter and I shot up a bunch of TIE fighters and then got killed over and over and over again in multiplayer online.
You sat in the X-Wing.
I have been in the X-Wing.
You went inside the X-Wing.
I have held the flight stick. I have a throttle. I have done it all.
Oh, did you go all the way?
I spent a lot of time binding controls.
You got fully kitted out on that thing?
Look, that might have been. I don't have pedals. I think pedals might have to be an add-on at some point in the future if I stick with this thing.
Is there a HOTAS? That's the question.
I have hot-assed all the way down.
Okay, that's commitment. Yeah. I'll give it to you. That's well. I figured I would just do the Xbox controller on this one.
I had the hot ass from when I briefly thought I was going to get deeply into Elite Dangerous.
Okay.
And then I played enough Elite Dangerous to realize I wasn't going to get into Elite Dangerous, but I was past the return window at that point. So it turns out the hot ass used to be a lot cheaper than it is in a post Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 and Star Wars Squadrons world.
Hang on to that thing. It might be a lifeline for you at some point. You could trade it. You could trade it for 10 pounds of beans in our coming future.
Yeah. Hey, you got some tomato seeds. You got a little bit of soy. I trade you a hot ass for that.
So you can use it as a T-bar over here.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there a term for that's kind of like actually the main reason I would want to use a controller in a VR headset is it's one unified control surface that you never take your hands off of. So there's no blind fumbling to find a thing. Like even
it's not really a problem.
Really? Like even a keyboard and mouse for me in VR, you kind of just for a second, if you move your hands, you have to feel around to get them back to, the home row position. Or in the case of how many pieces is your setup? A stick, a HOTAS? Oh, just two?
A stick and a throttle. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess your hands are kind of planted there. But anytime you have things you have to move your hands back and forth between, there's a perception issue.
So there are buttons. I feel like I brought the hot ass in when we did that Rebel Galaxy Outlaw thing last year. When you had me come in to do a quick look for you with that.
Were you in VR for that thing?
No. There's no VR. They don't have 3D cockpits, so there's no VR.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about.
But I brought the HOTAS.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's X52.
Yeah.
It was it worked. So there's buttons. There's toggle buttons below the stick that you have to kind of hit occasionally to manage power distribution and stuff like that. But it's been fine.
Okay.
I'm not having to take I'm using the right hat switch, the left hat switch, the throttle hat switch for targeting stuff. The main thumb hat switch is for power distribution. So one way is shields, one way is weapons, one way is energy, is engines, and the other one is rebalance it. And then shield distribution, all that stuff is spread along the other buttons. And it's working pretty well.
So you're so good at flying an X-Wing, you could do it blind.
I don't know if I could do it blind. I have my targeting computer on.
Yeah, dude, you heard the man. Turn off the targeting computer.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
Hi, Brad. Hello.
Hi. Hey, Brad.
What's up?
Anything happening this week? Anything exciting going on in the world?
Been hanging out. It's been like a quiet week around here, really.
Yeah, just no news. No news is good news. That's what we always say.
Happening in any category of my life at all.
No.
Just steady as she goes. Smooth sailing. Yeah.
It's a good Raconteur song. I found out that the president had the coronavirus while I was streaming.
What?
Wait, have you not been paying attention to the news at all?
Of course.
This is a spoiler.
Dude, I've done nothing but look at the news over the last 24 hours.
I found out while I was streaming, and I'm pretty sure I laughed because I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody was goofing on me.
I know.
Yeah.
All of life is a joke right now.
But you know what?
A sick, dark joke.
You know what is a light, fun,
a fluffy, airy joke?
Dystopia. Yeah, exactly. It's something that's full of laughter and joy and mirth.
Yeah. What's that?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
So about a month ago, we promised that we hit 1,000 backers on the old TechPod Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/TechPod, and back for as little as $2 a month to gain access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, or $5 a month to get patron exclusive content, which we posted earlier this week, where we talked about projects that we have in process and a bunch of other stuff. Before the weird thing happened, we promised that we would read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which it is my millionth time and your first time, which is why this is exciting to me. I'm very excited to hear how you found here 50 years ish after it was written, 45 years after it was written, how you found Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams' seminal 1979 work.
Well, it's scarcely more than 45 minutes since I finished it, so it's still pretty fresh on my mind.
Okay, coming in hot. What
a peculiar book this is.
That seems right.
I don't mean that in a bad way, but I wasn't quite. I mean, well, there are two ways to put this. I was not prepared for the way that book is structured, and the
complete lack of a traditional 3-act structure.
Like the tone of it, the weird like reality bending kind of metaphysical aspect of it really threw me for a loop. On the other hand, so much of the details have been absorbed into my brain through osmosis over the years that a lot of stuff about it. Should we talk freely about it, or can we just assume everybody listening to this has read it?
I feel like 40 years is outside the spoilers. Okay. So, okay. Well, let's do the warning.
Okay, because the example I was about to give is practically the end of the book, so I just want to make sure.
If you haven't read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, absorb the radio play, watch the TV series, read the dramatized audio version, or watch the movie featuring Sam Rockwell and Zooey Deschanel and Mos Def.
We should talk about the movie later. We'll get there.
If you haven't absorbed any of that and you're concerned about spoilers for this 40-year-old property that you probably already know every fucking thing about, maybe don't listen to this episode until you finish reading the book.
Yes, you've been warned.
We'll be here.
Kind of like I did. I felt like as I read through it, I knew about half of it already.
Yeah.
The 42 right. is the example obviously the classic example I was about to give of
the great answer.
Like the microsecond that anything hinting at a great question and answer started being talked about, 42 popped into my head immediately. Like that was just trying to think of some other examples. Like So Long and Thanks for All the Fish was something I was very well acquainted with. Marvin the Paranoid Android.
Marvin is an eternal character as far as I'm concerned. Zaphod Beeblebrox kind of is too.
Is that? So that was actually maybe my number one question coming into this was how you say his first name.
Zaphod.
Zaphod? Is that canonical?
Canonical, yes. That is from the radio play.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's about as authoritative a source as you can get.
Well, so
it technically preceded the book, right?
Yeah, I was going to say the reason this book is weird is that it is an adaptation of a serialized radio drama that was a radio comedy that was run on BBC radio in the 70s,
right,
and early 80s, and as a result, each chapter doesn't quite, but almost what is it he says? He says it doesn't quite, but it doesn't quite. It resembles, but doesn't quite entirely not resemble tea or something like that. It's like
sure.
Like
you mean like a nice Brownian motion generator?
Yes. Hold on. Did we get to the Brownian motion generator in this book?
Like a couple. Yeah, that's totally in there. That's how they arrived at the infinite improbability drive.
Oh, that's right. The Brownian motion simulator comes up in a later book as well.
I see.
So it's hard. It's hard for me to talk about specific plot beats and stuff in this book because I've listened to the radio dramas a lot over the years while I was driving back and forth places and commuting, and they're not quite entirely dissimilar, but they are the beats are the same, but then there's a whole bit in the first radio play about shoes that they just don't get into at all here. And I don't think towels make an appearance in the radio play.
Really?
Yeah, towels are very important in this book.
I thought towels after the preamble about towels, I thought that they would figure heavily into the actual plot, but they kind of didn't. So much.
See, this is why your Western expectation of Chekhov's gun does not apply in this one, because sometimes the payoff for a one-off joke about towels will take 2 or 3 books to get to.
That's fair.
In the world of Hitchhiker's Guide.
I would believe that. I'm trying to find. So I've got here the omnibus tome.
Yes,
all
the big
5
boy
books in front of me. In the introduction, cheekily titled "A Guide to the Guide," some unhelpful remarks from the author. He breaks down the history of this thing pretty exhaustively, and I'm trying to find. I know he listed it in here, and I can't find the list. He explains very explicitly which episodes of the radio play formed the basis of the novel.
Oh yeah, it's like 1, 3, 5, 7, and most of 13 or something like that. Yeah,
I found the list here of the second book, which is Restaurant at the End of the Universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
That book is episodes 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 5, and 6 in that order.
Yeah.
But I don't see the list of episodes of the first one. But yeah, like not exactly your typical 3-act structure here. Like it really, I don't know what I found more discombobulating. The fact
like
that
the weird jumps and the fact that there's very little continuity between chapters sometimes.
Right. Like I don't know what was more baffling. The fact that there was careening from one episode to the next, or the bizarrely Deus Ex Machina-esque way that they got there.
So one of the things that's important to know, and I feel like this was covered extensively in Neil Gaiman's first book, ironically, which was a biography of Douglas Adams and the story of the making of Hitchhiker's Guide. It's called Don't Panic. If you like Hitchhiker's Guide, it's worth reading. It's really funny to read proto Neil Gaiman prose in a nonfiction setting now. But literally there were times on the radio drama where they were recording the first part of an episode and he was writing the last pages of the episode while the recordings were happening.
So that was the other thought that occurred to me especially as I got to the end of the book, which kind of, would you say, I like the book. I don't want to sound like I'm pooping on it or anything here. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's just weird. It's really, it's very unconventional. So
I mean, it just stops. He's literally.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is it fair? Do you think it's fair to say the book kind of doesn't have an ending?
Oh no, the book absolutely doesn't have an ending. He even said in interviews, it may even be in the preamble in the introduction, that like he blew through 3 deadlines and the publisher said, "Hey, where are you?"
Yes.
And then he replied here, and they're like, "Okay, we'll just send that over and we'll publish it."
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Was he says in the intro, they literally said like, "Well, we're just going to send a car over. Just give us what you have."
Like that last line in the book, let's see, it's where he says. It's like a Zaphod Beeblebrox line, and it seems like something that was totally just written by like the editor of the book,
right?
Because it doesn't even seem like a Zaphod Beeblebrox line. It's okay, baby, hold tight, said Zaphod. We'll take in a quick bite at the restaurant at the end of the universe,
right? Which
is literally the title of the next book, which is it's like it is. In terms of like, there's so much in here that structurally shouldn't work. Like there's lines like an expression of deep worry and concern failed to cross either of Zaphod's faces. Like that is absolutely not the right way to write that sentence if you're writing grammatically correct English, but it works.
Sure, it gets the point across.
Yeah. This is another one of my favorites. When you're cruising down the road in the fast lane, you lazily sail past a few hard driving cars and you're feeling pretty pleased with yourself, and then accidentally change down from 4th to 1st instead of 3rd, thus making your engine leap out of your hood in a rather ugly mess. That's the first punctuation in that sentence.
Yes.
And then it finishes. It tends to throw you off your stride in much the same way that this remark threw Ford Prefect off his.
Right.
He could have just said Ford Prefect was mildly confused by this.
But it's a very evocative way to describe exactly the feeling that he had.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And there's like 10 of these. There's another one I highlighted on this page that is, when Ford meets Zaphod for the first time and he's like, "Oh, I said we've met." And Ford is like, "What the fuck are you talking about, monkey?" And he says, Ford rounded on Arthur with an angry flash in his eyes. Now he felt he was back on home ground. He suddenly began to resent having lumbered himself with this ignorant primitive who knew as much about the affairs of the galaxy as an Ilford-based gnat knew about life in Peking. Right? It's just right. The prose is delightful and unwieldy and bad.
A lot of flourishes in there for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like by the end of like the first chapter, I started to appreciate why this book would be such a like formative experience or a formative work for a young nerd. It was well, sorry, go ahead.
No.
Like specifically, it was the moment for me where he's laying in the mud trying to prevent the destruction of his house. And he basically outlogics the functionary who was there to preside over the destruction of his house into laying in the mud for him and stopping the destruction of his own house while he goes and has a beer.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah,
it's purely through some kind of like logical trap that he lays for this guy. You know, it's like, all right, I realized like immediately, like, this book is playing fast and loose with like the rules of reality and like metaphysics and logic in a way that like a kid who is a little bit too smart for his own grade would really get into. Does that make sense?
It's funny you say that, because one of my parents' friend's second wife, who is also one of my parents' friends, but she was much younger than them, handed me this book when I was probably somewhere between 10 and 12. So I was like in 5th or 6th grade probably. And she handed me this. She said, "You like Star Wars, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "You like funny stuff, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." She handed me this big book that had a giant, like, smiley green guy with thumbs up that said "Don't Panic" on the cover. And she's like, "Read this. You'll really like it." And I read it and I really liked it. And I read it probably 10 more times over the next few years. But it was such a, compared to the other stuff I'd been exposed to, the other books that I'd been exposed to, it was so profoundly weird, both in its kind of British colloquialisms and you know, in addition to talking about in addition to talking about outer space stuff that I actually like, I know which star is Betelgeuse, right? Like I can look at it and find it in the sky. I don't know where the hell Ilford is, right? That could have been a made up place. When he was talking about being on a field outside Innsbruck, Austria in the preamble, that could have been a made up place for all I knew in Northeast Tennessee in 1986 or whatever year it was. So it was being exposed to something that the prose was both so flourishing and weird and unsettling in some places, even, really shaped my search for stuff. And it actually, like, I went to the library and asked the librarian, "Hey, I read this Hitchhiker's Guide book." And she's like, "Well, you're probably too young for that." And I was like, "Yeah, it worked out." I was like, "Do you have anything else that's like that?" And then she pointed to me Mark Twain, and I bounced off of that immediately and was like, maybe not.
It's from a different era. I get where they maybe saw some overlap there. I found it to be pretty, I don't know, pretty perceptive around certain like sociological and economic topics and stuff too, about like the wealth hoarding of God, what is the
Magrathea?
The
Magrathians?
Yes,
yeah.
the collapse of the Galactic Empire due to the wealth hoarding of the Magrathians. The kind of the cynical nature of like self-serving politicians who just sort of prioritize like aesthetics over substance and policy, you know.
You see, Safe on Bibelbrox is a parable and a warning for our time. Yes,
totally. Except kind of a benign, like a goofball one, you know. Like,
I mean, I'm sure that the president thinks he's a benign goofball too. That stuff was very, like, a lot of, like, one of the interesting things reading this now is how much of the stuff that I missed or just completely glossed over without understanding at all. Now versus now. Reality TV, like, in a lot of ways, the stuff that they're talking about is a straight precursor to like when Deep Thought gives the philosophers, tells them, "Hey, you got $7 million years to make bank while I think about this. Just yell at each other enough and people will keep watching." Oh God, that's for something written in the 70s, like late 70s, early 80s. Holy cow. It was before Jerry Springer, it was before Donahue, really. Sure.
Or I mean, or even, before like the combative style of like 24/7 cable political programming, right?
There's no Real Housewives that he was watching in 1980 that he was like, "Oh yeah, this is good. People yelling at each other. People love that shit."
Right. Or that was like not that long after when was the famous the Gore Vidal Bill Buckley, like,
the debate thing,
that debate. Yeah. The thing that kind of was the like genesis of Fox News and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of echoes that a little bit, right? Like, just, couple of philosophers getting rich by just yelling at each other and disagreeing endlessly on television.
All you have to do is yell enough and anybody can be famous.
Yeah.
Thanks for the Kardashians, Douglas Adams. No, so in terms of the structure in this book, though, one of the things that struck me is there is a lot of Vince Gilligan has said that their writing process for Breaking Bad often was to like write themselves into a corner and then look around at the set and see what kind of tools were available to the characters that could get them out of this trouble they found themselves in. It's how, like, it's how they ended up when they had captured a guy and they didn't know how to capture a guy because they were new to the criming. They used a U-lock and like U-locked the dude around the neck to the pole in a basement. And that was because they knew that he'd have a U-lock because there was a bicycle in the garage that was in an earlier shot in one of the earlier scenes.
Right.
And there's a lot of that here too. Like the difference is that where the Breaking Bad writing staff would like, use something from reality, Douglas Adams would just lop off the whole inconvenient corner and
Totally.
move on to the next thing.
Yeah. He really gives himself a lot of just like very convenient sort of logical exits for a lot of situations, right?
Well, but it's an interesting situation because like the technology, the way he presents space technology, and this happens more in the later books, but even in this one, there's a broad range of what people, there's like hyperdimensional, super intelligent mice that have infinite technology. And then there's like, the rich white people equivalent in the current galaxy, like Zaphod Beaverbox, that have this super duper ship. And then there's just like the normal chuds that we don't see a lot of. But like the cops have low end gear, and when Marvin over depresses their ship, the computer stops working. Those guys just croak because their low budget hardware stops working.
Sure.
It's like I mean, you could say a lot of the outs are Deus Ex Machinas, but I mean, it's a world of it's the Arthur Clarke thing about, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah. So, is it plot armor or is it magic technology?
The way that they arrived at the infinite improbability drive, I think, is like the best example of that. Because the logical progression was basically like, what was it? They said like what, like the guy who invented it basically just said like, well, if they say it's a virtual impossibility, then that means it's actually a finite improbability. So I just need to calculate exactly what those odds are and then feed them into this machine and like flip the switch and it'll just come right out. And sure enough, it did.
The description of the parties that they use the technology for, that then the thing about making the hostess's undergarments leap 3 feet to the left or something.
Yes,
is just the kind of delightful science oversimplification / it's the equivalent of using liquid carbon dioxide or liquid nitrogen to make your drink bubble at a chemistry party when you're in college. And that was, the thing that I love about this book is that every time you start to think you have an understanding of what's going on, unlike every other science fiction thing where there's some primitive earthling thrust into a larger galactic world, that Arthur Clarke and Isaac Asimov and all of those folks were writing prior to this. These books are aware that this whole universe is going to seem absurd, and the idea of an infinite universe where there's some life forms that look like Bic pens and some life forms that are like hyper intelligent shades of the color blue is going to be inherently absurd to anyone who as recently as 50,000 years ago was hanging out in trees and wasn't using any kind of tool. So yeah, I find it to be utterly delightful. Even it's the other thing that struck me is how little it's dated. Yeah. Yes,
like I was making notes of some of the depictions of technology in there, and I was like, there's a couple spots, where it does feel very 70s, but like it envisions
the digital watches. Yeah, there's a lot about digital watches.
The digital watch stuff stands out in that context for sure. But I mean, the ones that seem pretty prescient to me were like, there's like the flying camera drones for the TV news around when the unveiling ceremony for the magic spaceship. Yeah. Like there's straight up cameras mounted to drones. In the bridge of the Heart of Gold, they talk about how like switches and knobs for traditional control surfaces in spaceships had evolved into touchscreens, and then those had just evolved into gesture-based kind of motion controls. And,
and also, like, he nailed the problem with Kinect. Like, if Douglas Adams had lived long enough to see Kinect, like the problem with this is that you move your head the wrong way, and all of a sudden the spaceship veers off to the left.
The line was something about like once you find a station that you like with that interface, you just have to sit infuriatingly still. But then, so we started talking about this before the episode, and then you started to correct me, and so I want to hear your answer here because you mentioned that you felt like the guide itself, or the physical depiction of the guide in the book, is kind of like a smartphone. Because
the guide is depicted as something that, like, if you were comparing it to a piece of hardware that people will probably be familiar with who are listening, probably like a BlackBerry. So it's like a screen with a whole boatload of buttons on the bottom.
Yes, that's how it's described. So like the point I started to make before we started recording was he came up with touchscreen interfaces, and he came up with a pocket computer with like functionally infinite information, but he didn't think to marry those two and produce the actual modern smartphone. But then you started to say that you had a reason for that.
Well, I mean, I think he was looking. I think he felt like the buttons were more practical, right? I think he felt like the touchscreen was somewhere on that spectrum between the hardware buttons and the having to sit infuriatingly still to avoid changing the channel by accident. Sure. And like the interesting thing about the guide to me is that it's basically just like an internet connected Wikipedia terminal, which somebody made. I feel like that was a product that somebody released in like 2005 or 2008. But yeah, the buttons, like the whole point of the guide is in his description of it. And this may be from a further book or from the radio play or something, but it's supposed to be non-threatening. It's supposed to be friendly. It's supposed to make you feel better about where you are. And remember, it's for hitchhikers. So it's for the poors. It's not fair. This isn't some cutting edge touchscreen technology. No, this is
a democratizing gateway to the galaxy's information.
Yeah. $5 Altairian a day.
Yes.
It's amazing. It was also amazing to me kind of how much of this book, particularly the book, impacted the like late 90s, early 2000s internet monoculture.
Yes.
ThinkGeek sold a blue Ringer t-shirt in like the Fallout colors with the number 42 on it.
Okay.
For years, I own one.
Sure.
It became Gina's favorite nightgown, and I bought that before we moved out here because, like, it came from Tennessee with us, right?
Sure. Where does the green guy come from? Like, it's on the cover of my omnibus edition, like the little dot kind of dude with the tongue and the arms.
Who knows?
Really?
Never shows up.
Right. I was racking my brain after I finished the book trying to figure out where that cover art comes from, and I don't think it does.
This is an informed guess, but my guess is that because it wasn't on the UK publisher original versions of the book.
I Googled some other alternate cover arts from different editions, and it's not on every edition of the book by any means.
No, it just says "Don't Panic" on the UK ones. And my guess, I don't know for sure, but my guess is that somebody in the UK, in the US publisher's art department said, hey, books sell better if they have a face on them.
Ironically, it's only like half a face because there's no nose or eyes. It's just a mouth.
Well, but that guy was on the version I got in like 1985.
Really?
Huh. Yeah, he's been on all of the he was on the audiobooks. He was on the all of that stuff.
Interesting.
I feel like maybe he was supposed to be on the cover of the guide saying "Don't panic."
Okay,
but it's unclear to me.
I would believe that. Sure.
I think of him as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy blob.
Yeah, I can see it.
I don't know if it was. I don't know. I don't remember if that. It's been a long time since I read the Neil Gaiman book. But I don't know if they covered that at all in there.
Like by the same token that I was going through and recognizing a bunch of the traits of this book that have permeated popular culture, I was also finding all these references that have been appropriated by other things. Like the second that the character of Trillian was introduced, I was like, really? Is that where that came from? Because I used that IM client for however long it existed.
Late 90s monoculture.
Yeah, totally. I was an avid Trillian user and I never had any idea where in fact, maybe I'm mixing. I was going to say, wasn't the icon of Trillian like a green dot, or am I mixing that up with something else?
You could make the icon of Trillian a green dot for your online status if you wanted, but I don't remember.
Okay, maybe I'm mixing that. Yeah, that might be a little bit too much.
I feel like it was like a blobby, logo-y looking thing.
Too much overlap, but I have to assume that's where they got the name of that IM client from.
100%.
As soon as I saw Paranoid Android, I obviously thought of the Radiohead song.
The Babelfish. Remember, Google Translate was originally called the Babelfish.
Yes. So, okay, thank you. It was killing me. I was trying to make a list of these before we started here, and I knew there were at least a couple I was forgetting. Babelfish was a huge one.
Oh, no matter if all people do in this week's episode, part of the TechPod Discord, is talk about the things that are the same, that like this caused to be named something.
Details of this book that have leaked out
it'll
into
be pages and pages.
Product naming. I would love to hear more. I'm glad you thought of Babelfish. I noticed. I mean, I know the concept of a Googleplex exists outside of Google, the company.
It's just a math thing, right?
Right. But I do wonder if the inclusion of that term in this book maybe helped inform them.
I mean, clearly Sergey and Larry or somebody there early on were fans, right?
Yes, right. There were even like little, just kind of like manners of speech in here that I recognized from people I used to talk to on IRC back in the late 90s.
Oh yeah,
like just like little kind of verbal tics, almost like ways of truncating words and stuff like that. That I was like, that explains.
For example,
like the one that really comes to mind is the way that people shorten the word because.
Oh, the COZ?
COS is the one in the book that I read, because like at least in America, I think the most common way on the internet, maybe not so much these days, but definitely back in the kind of late 90s, the most common way to truncate that word was CUZ, cuz, or at least in my experience.
No.
Really?
Oh, I think that might be a regional one.
Okay, maybe so. Anyway, like I
never saw it. I saw CAUSE with an apostrophe at the front.
Yeah, that one. Well, that
hardly saves you any characters.
It's a little too formal for me, thank you. Yeah, if you use the apostrophe, that's only you're saving yourself one character stroke.
I always thought if you see CUZ, people are talking about their cousin.
Well, that was another use for it, sure. But I definitely saw it. Anyway, like I knew somebody who, it's funny, all the overlap here. I knew somebody who spelled it COS on IRC. They were also a big Radiohead fan.
Yeah.
Also, I think probably Hitchhiker's Guide fan. Like, I don't know, whatever. It's just a bunch of little details from my life that I picked out of this book and thought like, oh, that maybe is exactly where that came from.
Well, the weird thing about this to me is that I don't know. Like, I don't fully understand. Like, I know that a lot of times because Britain is a little bit smaller and because at the time there was more of a monoculture, there was radio, there was TV, but there weren't 50 million channels and Netflix and all that stuff. Like, I don't know how much of a phenomenon. I know that this was presented in Don't Panic as a phenomena, but I don't know what a radio drama phenomena meant in 1980. Like, even in the UK, I don't know if that meant that everybody had listened to this, or if like a double-digit percentage of the country had listened to this, or if, 1 million people had listened to this. And I wonder how much, like, this felt a little bit like a counterculture-y kind of niche thing in the US right up until the point that I got on the internet.
And then you were like, oh, wait, everybody I know has read this.
I was like, yeah, all these people have been, they all know that. Yeah, there's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Mud. There's an I didn't know there was an Infocom game. I should get that. I should play that.
Have you played that?
I've never played it.
Really?
No.
We should check that out maybe sometime.
I've been saving it. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
I mean, he goes into that in the introduction, that he basically makes it sound like every different manifestation of this work has been pretty different from every other one.
Mm-hmm.
So have you listened to the radio play?
Yes, multiple times. It's very good.
Is it that different?
The thing that he said about it being like chapters 1, 3, 5, 7, and most of 14 is absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay. It was kind of hard to tell in the introduction if he was just being self-deprecating.
No,
but
because it was true.
I think the phrasing is something like the novel bore very little resemblance to the radio play, and then the computer game bore very little resemblance to the novel.
So, for example, in the radio play, when the cops are shooting at the computer bank that they're on, the computer bank blows up and they all think that they're dead, but they're not. They're just at the restaurant. And that happens at almost exactly the same, like as they're leaving Magrathea. But there's a whole lot of confusion about what's going on. And it is the biggest plot jump, I think, in the whole series.
Huh. So they just skip right over Marvin convincing the cop spaceship to commit suicide.
Oh, they get to it.
Okay.
I don't actually know if they get to the Marvin convincing this. Yeah, you're right.
That was one of the darker moments in that book, I thought.
Like there's so Marvin, I think, was originally supposed to be a throwaway character who people ended up liking on the radio show. So he got to hang around, and Marvin ends up hanging around a lot in the books.
Interesting.
Like a whole. Marvin is very good. Marvin's one of my favorites.
Well, I keep saying they, but it's just Douglas Adams. Does he run with some of the dangling threads at the end of this book, like what happened with Zaphod? Also, I am, not to cut myself off, I'm not used to saying Zaphod yet. In my head, it was Zaphod.
Oh no, Zaphod.
Or I even wondered, I didn't think this, but I even wondered if somebody might pronounce it like Zapod or something like that. But
Zaphod?
Yes, something like that. But Zaphod.
Beeblebrox, inventor of the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster.
Like the mystery of whatever he did to his own brain. Whatever's locked in his brain, like, do they revisit stuff like that?
There's 5 more books, Brad.
Yeah.
It'll work. You'll get there.
Okay. Are they worth it?
Yeah. So we talked about Dune a couple of weeks ago, and my advice on Dune is that the first book is a transformative work of science fiction written, one of the best pieces of science fiction written in the 20th century. And each subsequent book is worse than the one that precedes it.
It sounds like if you prize your experience with that first book, you should safeguard it by not reading anymore.
Maybe the second and third books if you really, really feel the need to get more, but just walk away.
But that's not the case here.
These books, even the books, so like the 5th and the 6th books, the 6th book was published posthumously. The 5th book is fine. Like but like even the ones that are bad have delightful bits in them. Like the 5th book has this amazing bit. There's 2 things in it that I really love. I loved it enough that I bookmarked them years ago. One of them is this, and I'll read it. When it's about technology and failing, and he talks about this thing that he invented called the Great Ventilation and Telephone Riots of SRDT 3454. That all mechanical, electrical, or quantum mechanical, or hydraulic, or even wind, steam, or piston-driven devices are now required to have a certain legend emblazoned on them somewhere. It doesn't matter how small the object is, the designers of the object have got to find a way of squeezing the legend in somewhere because it is their attention that is being drawn to it rather than necessarily that of the users. The legend is this. The major difference between a thing that might go wrong and a thing that cannot possibly go wrong is that when a thing that cannot possibly go wrong goes wrong, it usually turns out to be impossible to get at or repair.
That is that's a very Douglas Adams passage.
There's also a fantastic bit about sandwiches in that 5th book that is worth reading. But like, look, when the first, second, and third books were written all kind of in the same time frame. They tell a really specific story. The 4th book was added on later. Each of them wraps up loose ends. Some of the loose ends are wrapped up in the bad Star Wars way, where like you find out that the guy in the background at the cantina on Tatooine was a bounty hunter or like some wanted criminal or some bullshit. Some of them are wrapped up in the Star Trek good way, where like, you know, Khan shows up in the second movie and you're like, oh, okay, it's okay. So, you know, you pays your money and you takes your chances, I guess.
Sure. Was he, do you know if he was still actively working on this stuff? Well, I mean, I guess if the last book was posthumous, I guess he was. If he was still like actively trying to extend the series when he passed away, or was he trying to wrap things up?
I never had the chance to meet him, which was a bummer because like I was just getting to the point that I might have been invited to some game thing that he worked on when he died. I feel like the maybe apocryphal stories about him having problems actually being a productive writer are such that I would say he continued working on it in spite of his best efforts.
Huh.
Like he wrote these 6 books. He wrote 2 books in the Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency series that are also very good and like absurdist, but on Earth with a little tinge of mysticism. Like like they're fantastical books set in the real world. Is the right way to describe them, but not like swords and elves and shit like that. It's just like math is weird and like when you do weird math, weird things happen.
Sure.
And then he wrote a nonfiction book called Last Chance to See because he was a really committed environmentalist and worked with the World Wildlife Federation and a bunch of places like that, and went to Africa to see a bunch of endangered animals and kind of use his platform to spread the word and let people know that there's stuff worth saving.
Yeah, that's interesting because the reason I ask is that in the foreword in this big tome that I've got by Neil Gaiman, he implies pretty strongly that Douglas Adams never set out to be a writer and like, in fact, maybe didn't even enjoy being one.
I think that's right. I mean, like if you look at who the author proxy in his books are, like Dirk Gently is not the author proxy. Ford Prefect and Zaphod Beeblebrox aren't. He's Arthur Dent, right? He's a guy that's always in a little bit over his head.
Fish out of water.
Yeah. And I feel like that's absolutely the case.
A little down on his luck.
I mean, yeah, kind of a little bit of a schmuck.
Guy who's like a little swept up in events outside of his control. Yeah,
but like he's trying to do right. Yeah. Right. That's the defining characteristics of Arthur Dent is that he often tries to do the right thing and it ends up tragically not working out for him.
Sure. I should revise what I just said. I don't think it's that he didn't want to be a writer. I don't think it's that he didn't want to be a novelist necessarily. Like, I think the forward kind of painted him as like he was looking to follow in the steps of like Monty Python and people like that. I mean,
he wrote Doctor Who episodes, right?
It was like he seemed like he wanted to be more of a comedy and TV writer type, and sort of fell into writing books.
I don't know. It's funny. If I ever met Neil Gaiman, I think the thing I would talk to him about most is Douglas Adams rather than it's like,
it's fair.
Yeah. It's,
you know what? I mean, that is like, whatever, not to get off on a tangent here, but like, and I don't meet a ton of famous people all the time, but like, I think that's a good strategy for meeting your heroes or meeting famous people, is to talk to them about something other than themselves.
For most people, I think that is a very good strategy.
Having a pre-made or a ready conversation topic if that is something they're interested in rather than their own work is it's a good strategy.
Exactly. So I won't spoil things for you for the future, but yes, there are almost every single thread in this book is picked up at some point.
Okay.
The next book picks up exactly where this left off.
Yeah.
Right. You literally come back to the Heart of Gold as they're going to get lunch.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's really just a result of the way things played out that I'm even interested in like what his life goals and stuff were. Cause if he was still with us, like I wouldn't spend 2 seconds.
Podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't spend 2 seconds thinking about like, oh, what was he like? And what were his ambitions and stuff, because he'd still be around and it just wouldn't be that interesting. But because it like his untimely demise does give the arc of his career a little bit of a tragic undertone.
Well, it's yeah. And it's interesting because like we all know people like him. Like he was a guy who was into computers, right? He was even when he didn't have anything really he could do with a Mac, he had a Mac or an Apple II and was like always noodling with that and was sending files back and forth. And like we know there's a Neil Gaiman, I think Terry Pratchett collaboration book where they made an Amazon series out of a few years ago, but it's basically they were sending a floppy disk back and forth in the mail. So like Neil would write one chapter and he would save it to the floppy disk, and then he'd mail the floppy disk to Terry Pratchett, and Terry would read what he wrote and then write the next chapter. And they were alternating POVs throughout this book. And that was the kind of stuff like Douglas Adams was really excited about how technology was going to grow. And at the same time, like I look at how my views about technology in general have been shaped by reading this book at a formative age. And, it's always, I don't want to say it's cynical because it's not, but it's like carefully metered excitement always. Cause like, there's always two sides of every technological coin, whether it's, splitting the atom for the first time or, everybody carrying a location aware, always on microphone spying device in our pockets all the time. You have to think about how all of this stuff is going to be used. And he spends a lot more time thinking about it turns out that the Heart of Gold is an ecological disaster for reasons that they won't get into for like five books.
Interesting. Okay.
And there's all sorts of interesting stuff that comes along with his kind of take on tech in general. Yeah.
It's kind of sad looking back that somebody with that kind of perspective wasn't around for longer.
Yeah. I remember it was, he died when I was working at Maximum PC.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was 2001, was it? Right?
It was early 2000s for sure. He was 43 or 42 or something, 44.
49?
He was born on the day they discovered DNA. They announced the discovery of DNA.
49.
49.
Yeah, was that like huge news? I wasn't really aware of him at the time, so it didn't catch my eye.
I probably found out about it on Slashdot or something like that. So it was substantial.
Yeah.
It was enough that enough people at the office were fans that like people were bummed and talking about it at the water cooler and stuff like that.
Sure. How's the movie? Have you seen the movie? I want to say, I think it might be in the introduction that he mentions in there something about there's like an idea for a movie or like talk of there being a movie, but like it has just been in some kind of development hell forever.
Yeah. So it finally came out in like 2013 or 2014, I think.
Yeah.
The movie's fine. Yeah. Like the movie, it's I mean, when you take something that's as unabashedly weird as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is and try to transmogrify that into a movie, it's a challenge.
I was thinking that the whole time I was reading the book, I was just like, this book, the mental image that you paint of the events of this book is so fuzzy to begin with, because the book itself has such a like tenuous grasp on the rules of reality that like having to depict that in some tangible form on screen, A, would be very hard for the person having to do it. B, I don't think I would want to put such like rigid imagery to the kind of open-ended like imagination that goes along with this book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, like what does sleek like a running shoe look like when you're talking about a spaceship, right? If you can't make it look like a shoe, right? But like there's a very specific kind of curve that you think about with running shoes, or like every time the Heart of Gold like bends reality or remakes reality in some way, like having to make the depiction of that like finite and rigid on screen, as opposed to just the like endless weirdness that can be conjured in your head when you read that stuff. Like I almost don't think I would want to see that. Well, yeah, like when they're talking about the waves at Guildford, moving the buildings moving up and down against the waves at Guildford, I was like, I wish I knew what Guildford looks like, because of course it's not like I could just go to Google image search or Street View or something and see what this beachside town in England looks like, right? I feel like the production design team did a really good job of capturing the raw essence of what these things look like. Like the Zaphod Beeblebrox head has some pretty garbage CG on Sam Rockwell's second head. Oh, so I was going to ask who some of the casting. Oh God, Martin Freeman is in it. Martin Freeman is Arthur Dent. Okay. He's very good. Okay. If that movie was released in a vacuum without the other 12 different media that this product had come out in, it would have been a delight and people would have been really excited about it. Like they launched something into this huge fandom, and you know, it's fine. I'm glad it exists. How's that? Yeah, sure. It didn't take anything away from Hitchhikers, and in a franchise that is so relentlessly like cross media, I don't think it hurt. It's fine. I haven't watched it. I only watched it once or twice. I should go back. I'm kind of curious how they handled the whale and the petunia when I think about it, because like that's such a profoundly weird and disturbing, like the whole internal monologue of the whale. Yes, when I was 12 years old was fucking hilarious. Sure, right. But now it's like, oh, this is a horrible existence for this whale. Yes. This is not okay, man. But also how you would communicate all of that on film, I have no idea. Yeah, right. Like, do you just have is it just a third person shot of the whale falling toward the ground? It was like an internal monologue running. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that would work. 2 stars, said Roger Ebert, for what it's worth. Yeah, I mean, look, he thought video games weren't art. So he said its wit may confuse novices. Well, it's too smart. To be fair, I suppose I could see. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is, like, if you think about a lot of the language that makes this book land, it's not in dialogue necessarily. Right. Yes. It's in the descriptions of the world, which are harder to convey. I do remember really loving the guide. Like they do a whole different treatment for the guide, and they're all animated and really cool for the guide entries. The TV show, the BBC TV show from the 80s is, do you remember like the aesthetic that we had when we worked in the whiskey basement, and we would just like grab some shit from around the thing and make some weird prop or whatever for a happy hour show or something? Yeah. It seemed like the whole thing was done on that kind of budget. Okay. That's fair. Yeah. Like they had like blank wall sound stages, and like it's real low budge. The audio's bad. The costumes are often made of like tin foil. It looks like Doctor Who. It looks like if they had to make 8 episodes of something on the budget they used for like the first act of a Doctor Who episode. I was going to ask you, like, I have like basically no experience with like Doctor Who or Red Dwarf or any of that genre of like kind of cheeky British sci-fi, but like like this book is definitely part of that tradition, right? So I'm not a Doctor Who guy. I bounced off because I like it was on PBS, which when they got when the weather was a real specific way when I was a kid. So I don't really have any kind of connection to Doctor Who. I've never seen Red Dwarf. I don't, it feels very Python-esque in the kind of British absurdism. I do know that science fiction was maybe generally as a genre was maybe generally more popular in the UK at that time period than it was here. And specifically like not that this is hard science fiction, but like harder science fiction, less space opera. So like stuff like character driven stuff like Star Trek, or like things about exploration and stuff like that, not zooming around and rescuing space princesses like Star Wars.
Right. Yeah. Not a lot of big character driven melodrama type stuff. I guess there's a new TV show that Hulu is doing.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Looks like finding some news stories from about a year ago that says they are working on a new one.
Interesting.
Carlton Cuse of Lost fame appears to be involved in it.
I didn't like Lost.
Well, got bad news for you.
It's going to be garbage. It's going to be bad.
I don't know that it doesn't look like there's a lot more information about it yet, but it looks like that is probably still in the works. So maybe stay tuned for that, or maybe don't. I don't know. Like I said, I might just, read the book and be good with this.
If you're going to engage in two forms of media around Hitchhikers, I would read the book, the first book and the second book, and then I would go back and listen to the first radio drama.
Okay.
I think it's on Audible is where I found it last, and you can use your Audible credit and get the whole thing at one swoop. So it's like it's long.
I might have to work that Infocom game in there somewhere.
I would totally play the Infocom game sometime.
Is that a text parser based game?
It is a text. It is an Infocom text adventure in the vein of Zork.
Okay, then I almost definitely want to check that out.
So let's stream it sometime. On the BBC site, you can play it in a window, and I think it's also on archive.org. When I looked for it last, I played Starship Titanic years later, which is Douglas Adams written. Like 2D it's like post Mist and Seventh Guest, but like. I think 3D rendered environments in a lot of cases with like some video characters overlaid on top of them. And it's very funny and very weird. It's about a starship, obviously, that can't crash, that bad things happen to.
Of course. I'd expect no less. Oh, yeah. Wow. This really is just a text adventure, isn't it?
Oh, it is a text-as-texted adventure, yes.
Wow, okay. I assumed there were at least some rudimentary graphics involved, but this is full-on Zork era, huh?
Well, so I think the BBC one the BBC version adds some text, some graphics to it. Like they draw some stuff.
Anniversary edition's got like a frame around it or something, but yeah, it's pretty rudimentary, it looks like. So,
what did you think about Slarty Bartfast?
Is that a reference to something? I was trying to unpack that.
Well, I think Slarty Bartfast has been there was always a guy on RC named Slarty Bartfast.
Oh, of course. I certainly laughed when that name was introduced, but I wasn't sure if there was some connection I was missing there.
I assume that's a made up name. I know Douglas Adams liked to steal names from his family and friends.
Okay.
The Earthling who wrote the second worst poetry in the universe is a feminized version of one of his ex-roommates.
Okay.
Huh. He also used a realtor's name in one of the later books to the point that like the realtor would get angry calls from people saying, "Hey, why'd you rip off Douglas Adams? That's shitty."
Wow.
Yeah. It's pretty good. I love one last thing to hit on. I love the description of infinity when they go into the planet in Magrathea. That it wasn't infinity, and they go into the hyperspace chamber where they make planets.
Yes.
He says it wasn't infinity. In fact, infinity itself looks flat and uninteresting.
Yes.
Looking up in the night sky is looking into infinity. Distance is incomprehensible and therefore meaningless.
Yeah.
The chamber into which the air car emerged was anything but infinite. It was just very, very, very big. So big that it gave the impression of infinity far better than infinity itself.
I thought that was a really delightful paradox of like the only way to depict infinity is to make it finite.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's a very clever book. A very, very clever book.
Yeah. I remain a fan.
Yeah. I'm glad I know now.
Yeah. Now you understand. Are you going to keep reading, Brad? Or are you going to stall out here?
Filled in a bunch of blanks for me. I might
Don't
keep
you want
going.
to know what happens?
Yes,
I was
going to say, like, I'm especially considering it just kind of leaves a bunch of stuff hanging. and
you
just
have the rest
sort
of them there.
and just sort of ends. Yeah, like I literally just need to turn 2 extra pages and I'll be into the next one. So
yeah,
exactly. I think I might keep going for a while.
Cool. Well, I guess we've reached the point in the show where we need to thank our patrons who made this possible.
Right.
Everybody who signed up to get us over that 1,000 patron hump. We're now at 1,122 patrons as of this moment when we're recording on Saturday morning. So thank you all for supporting the show. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
And especially thanks to our executive producer level patrons, Jacob Chappell, Andrew Cotton, and David Allen. We really appreciate all of you. And if you want to find out how you can back the podcast, back the Patreon, support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. If you can't, that's fine.
Yeah.
We totally appreciate just like posting on Twitter that you like the show and tell us why you like the show. We love that.
Leave an iTunes review, any of that stuff.
Yeah. Like and subscribe if we were a YouTube channel, but we're not, so you don't have to do that. But definitely, if you do back the Patreon, you get access to the Discord, which is just a wonderful respite on an internet filled with bad things on the day to day.
Yeah,
where you can come and like dip into other people's weird hobbies and maybe find a new weird hobby of your own and talk about books and talk about stuff you're enjoying and like. The Hades conversations happening in the Hades appreciation / gaming channel right now are very good.
That's very informative. Now I can finally enter the aptly named reading room that you created now that I finished this book, and I don't have to worry about seeing people talk about it because I've finished it now. Yeah,
spoilers is no fear not for spoilers. But yeah, you can go to, again, that's patreon.com/techpod. And we'd appreciate anything you can do to help us out. Let other people know about the show.
Yes.
Because the listeners, it turns out, are how people find new podcasts. You tell your friends, hey, there's this dope podcast.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth. It works.
Still effective. I'd be curious to hear what people think about this episode.
Yeah.
Like us covering a book in some fashion.
A 40-year-old book.
Yeah, we had a couple other ideas in this vein if people like this, but if they hate it, then please let us know so we don't waste your time on that.
And you can send emails if you have, specifically, I'd like to hear things that you think Hitchhiker has influenced. To techpod@content.town. That's the email address for emails, which we'll do in like 3 more weeks.
Yep.
So, thank you all for listening. I guess we'll see y'all next week. Brad, you got any closing thoughts on this one?
So long, and thanks for all the fish.